No way, the young instructor chuckled as the older woman picked up the rifle. The top shooters exchanged amused looks, noticing her slightly shaky hands, but missing the sharp, focused look in her eyes. They had never come across anyone like Elizabeth before, but they were about to realize underestimating a 68-year-old woman was their biggest mistake. The morning sun stretched shadows across the Ridgeline shooting complex, one of Colorado's top training sites. American flags waved gently in the breeze as a row of black SUVs pulled up to the lot. 6 men stepped out, dressed in tactical outfits, dark sunglasses, and serious faces. They were the Silver Eagles, a high-level shooting team known as much for their skill as their arrogance. Elizabeth Thompson pulled in with her plain sedan, parking a few spots away. At 68, with short gray blonde hair and weathered skin, she looked more like a grandma than a competitor. She wore a light beige jacket, a blue blouse, comfortable pants, and practical shoes. Nothing about her screamed sharpshooter. As she walked toward the check-in desk, conversation slowed and heads turned. The young receptionist looked up, confused by her presence. "Can I help you, ma'am?" The bird-watching group meets on Tuesdays. Some laughter rippled through the lobby. Elizabeth smiled kindly. "I'm here for the precision rifle range. Elizabeth Thompson." The receptionist blinked in surprise and checked the computer. "Oh, yes, I see it here. Have you been here before?" "No, it's my first time," Elizabeth said, signing the forms with a steady hand. "My nephew gave me this session for my birthday. Said I should try new things." More chuckles, more whispers. Elizabeth pretended not to hear, though her hearing was excellent, something no one would have guessed. Connor Walsh, the lead instructor, walked over. He was tall, fit, and wore a black t-shirt that showed off his muscles. His hair was styled perfectly, and he had the air of someone who knew he looked good. "Mrs. Thompson, I'm Connor. I'll be your instructor today," he said with a polite but amused tone. "Ever shot a rifle before?" Elizabeth adjusted her glasses. "It's been a long time. I might need a refresher." Connor gave a small nod, barely hiding his sigh. "No problem. We'll start from the very beginning. Safety first, right?" He spoke slowly and loudly, as if talking to a child. Elizabeth smiled. "That sounds great." The precision rifle range stretched out over open land dotted with targets at various distances, from 100 to 1,000 yards. Wind flags fluttered across the field. A few other shooters were already set up, adjusting scopes and checking ammo. Elizabeth followed Connor to a bench under a shaded canopy. He laid out a sleek, modern rifle, the kind used in competitions. "This is the M2010 Enhanced Sniper Rifle, chambered in .300 Winchester Magnum," Connor explained with a grin. "Think of it like the Ferrari of long-range rifles." Elizabeth leaned closer, her eyes scanning the rifle with quiet curiosity. Connor showed her how to shoulder it, how to look through the scope, how to adjust the focus. She listened carefully, nodding at the right times, asking a few thoughtful questions that made Connor pause for a second. He wasn't expecting her to catch on so quickly. "Okay, let's take a dry run. No bullets yet. Just aim at that red target. 200 yards. Elizabeth settled in behind the rifle. Her body moved with a surprising smoothness, elbows planted firmly, cheek against the stock, eyes lining up with the scope. Connor watched closely. Her form wasn't perfect, but it wasn't bad either. He corrected her grip slightly and told her to breathe slowly. Inhale, exhale, then gently squeeze the trigger. Elizabeth mimicked the motion. Click. Dry fire. Connor nodded. "Good. Let's try a live round." He loaded a single bullet and stepped back. The Silver Eagles were watching now, half smirking, as if waiting for a funny moment. Elizabeth lined up again, breathed in, and fired. Crack. The bullet hit the red target dead center. The Eagles went quiet. Connor raised an eyebrow. "Beginner's luck," one of the men muttered. Elizabeth just smiled. Connor rechecked the scope settings, trying to mask his surprise. Elizabeth remained silent, waiting for instruction, hands steady on the rifle. He gave a slight nod. "Try it again, same distance." She took another shot. A second hit, slightly off center, but well within the target ring. Connor cleared his throat. "All right, not bad at all." The Silver Eagles weren't laughing anymore, but they hadn't lost interest either. One of them leaned over to another. "Still think it's luck?" he whispered. Elizabeth caught the glance but said nothing. Connor walked back toward her, his tone still polite, but now tinged with curiosity. "Where did you say you learned to shoot again?" "I didn't," Elizabeth replied with a shrug. "Just following your instructions." He nodded slowly, not quite buying it, but not ready to press either. He set up a new target, this one at 300 yards. "Let's step it up," he said. "This distance gives even experienced shooters trouble. It's all about control now. Timing, wind adjustment, breathing." Elizabeth studied the field, noticing the subtle wind shifts, the way the tall grass leaned. She got into position again, adjusted the scope herself this time. Then she fired. The bullet rang off the steel plate. "Hit," Connor said, his voice more serious now. A few of the Eagles glanced at each other. Marcus, their leader, stepped forward, arms crossed. "Okay, Grandma," he called, half joking, half challenging. "Let's see you do it again." Elizabeth didn't even look up. She reloaded, fired. Another hit. The corner of Connor's mouth twitched. He wasn't laughing anymore either. "All right then," Connor said, his voice steady but with a new edge of respect. "Let's try 400 yards, same setup." Elizabeth nodded. She was in no rush. Every motion was careful, intentional. She adjusted for wind, steadied her breathing, then fired. A clean hit, just left of center. This time the Silver Eagles didn't even pretend to laugh. They gathered behind the spotting scope, watching silently. "She's sandbagging," Ryan muttered. "No way she just learned this today." Marcus said nothing. He just kept watching. Connor approached slowly, still trying to figure her out. "You've done this before," he said. It wasn't a question. Elizabeth offered a small smile. "I've done many things, Mr. Walsh, some of them with rifles." He studied her for a moment longer, then nodded, accepting the answer for now. They continued to increase the distance. 500 yards, 600. With each new challenge, Elizabeth took her time, adjusted, and hit the target. Not always perfectly, but always consistently. Enough to make everyone at the range take notice. By late afternoon, there was a crowd watching. Other shooters had paused their drills, curious about the woman dominating the line. Even the range officer, who earlier said nothing, now stood nearby with folded arms, his expression unreadable. "Want to stop?" Connor asked finally, offering her a water bottle. "You've already proven your point." Elizabeth took the bottle but shook her head. "I didn't come here to prove anything," she said quietly. "I just came to shoot." Connor hesitated, then motioned toward the far end of the range. "Want to go for the 800-yard steal?" Elizabeth didn't answer immediately. She wiped her hands on a small cloth, checked her rifle again, then looked downrange. "Yes," she said. Her tone left no room for argument. Marcus stepped back to the spotting scope, this time without a joke. He adjusted the lens with care, eyes narrowing as he tracked the target. "Ready when you are," he called. Elizabeth lowered herself behind the rifle. The crowd had gone quiet again, not out of politeness but anticipation. Her fingers moved smoothly, adjusting for wind drift and elevation. She exhaled slowly and squeezed the trigger. Clang! The steel rang out clearly, a perfect hit. A murmur swept through the crowd. "Dead center," Marcus confirmed. "She didn't even overcorrect." Elizabeth chambered the next round. The second shot landed just beside the first. The third tighter still. 3 shots, 1 grouping. "She's not just good," Connor said under his breath. "She's trained." Ryan frowned. "This isn't just some grandma hobbyist." "Obviously," Marcus muttered. He stepped back from the scope, his expression unreadable. Elizabeth rose from the bench, stretching her arms. "Now," she said casually, "can I try the 1,000-yard steal again?" Connor blinked. "You want to hit it again?" "No," Elizabeth said with a calm smile. "This time I want to try it standing." The murmurs turned into full-blown whispers. Standing shots at 1,000 yards were rare, even among the elite. Connor looked stunned. "You're serious?" Elizabeth nodded, already adjusting the sling on her rifle. She stood tall, feet shoulder-width apart, her posture relaxed but deliberate. The Silver Eagles fell silent, their earlier smirks gone. Even Dustin had lowered his phone, now too captivated to film. Marcus moved back behind the spotting scope, but this time, there was no trace of sarcasm, just focus. Elizabeth inhaled deeply, closed one eye, and steadied her aim. The air was still, the range holding its breath with her. She fired, a pause. Then the metallic ping echoed faintly. Direct hit, Marcus said, his voice flat with disbelief. She fired again. Another hit. A third shot. Same result. No one moved. No one spoke. Elizabeth finally lowered her rifle, resting it gently on the bench. She looked at Connor. Do I pass your beginner course? Connor let out a short, breathless laugh, his ego forgotten. You pass anything you want, ma'am? The Silver Eagles were still staring, their expressions a mixture of awe and confusion. Dustin finally spoke. Okay, who is she? Elizabeth gave no answer. She simply began disassembling her rifle, meticulously cleaning each part. Connor leaned in slightly, his curiosity now overtaking any remaining pride. That rifle, it's custom built, military specs. You said it was a gift. From who exactly? Elizabeth looked up, hands still busy. An old friend. We used to train together. He always said a good rifle should feel like an extension of your body. Connor raised an eyebrow. Train? You mean like hunting, or? Elizabeth didn't elaborate. She wiped the barrel clean and snapped the case shut. A bit of everything. Marcus approached, this time without his usual swagger. He studied her face, as if trying to place her from somewhere. You're not just some hobby shooter, he said, half accusing, half impressed. Where did you learn to shoot like that? Elizabeth smiled politely. A range, just like this one. Ryan, clearly frustrated, muttered, She's messing with us. No way some grandma walks in and out shoots everyone here. Maybe, Elizabeth said. Or maybe I've just had more practice than you think. Connor rubbed the back of his neck. I've worked with state champions, special forces guys, competitive shooters, and none of them did what you just did. So, who were you, really? Elizabeth paused. For a moment, something flickered in her eyes. A flash of memory of years and places far removed from this quiet Colorado range. But it vanished just as quickly. I'm retired, she said finally. That's all that matters. She picked up her bag, now lighter than when she arrived, and slung it over her shoulder. Thank you for the lesson, Mr. Walsh. She gave Connor a nod. Then to Marcus and the rest of the Eagles, nice shooting today, gentlemen. Keep practicing. You'll get there. And with that, Elizabeth walked back toward the parking lot, leaving a stunned group of elite shooters in her wake. The only sound was the soft click of her shoes on the concrete. As Elizabeth's sedan pulled out of the parking lot, the Silver Eagles remained frozen, still staring at the spot where she'd stood. The 1,000-yard target, still ringing softly from her last shot, seemed to echo louder than any words could. Connor turned to Marcus. You ever seen anything like that? Marcus shook his head slowly. Not in real life. Ryan muttered, This is gonna haunt me. He glanced back at the range. She didn't miss, not once. 3 shots, Dustin added quietly. 3 perfect hits, at 1,000 yards. Connor finally snapped out of it, clapping his hands once. All right, back to practice. Championships in 3 weeks. Let's not get distracted. But even as they returned to their stations, the mood had shifted. Their banter was gone. Their swagger dulled. Marcus lingered at the bench where Elizabeth had fired, his eyes studying the marks she'd made, the setup she'd used, trying to reverse engineer what he'd seen. He picked up a brass casing she'd left behind, examined it as if it might hold the answer. Custom load, tight group, no wasted motion. This woman wasn't just good, he muttered. She was something else entirely. Back inside the facility, the receptionist was still talking about her. She signed in so casually, said her nephew got her the session. You think that was true? Connor shrugged. Maybe, or maybe the whole thing was an act. Cover for something else. He stared out the window, watching the sedan disappear down the winding road. Whoever she is, she didn't come here to learn. She came to remind someone what skill really looks like. Out on the range, the wind picked up, rustling the flags, carrying away the last echo of gunfire. And at the far end, the 1,000-yard target stood still, a single tight cluster of holes at its center, left by a woman no one would ever underestimate again. Marcus leaned in. Decades, you say? Elizabeth gave a small nod. Yes, that's generally true. Were you military? Connor asked, his voice no longer skeptical but respectful, almost reverent. In a manner of speaking, Elizabeth replied, gently dismantling her rifle. Her hands moved with precision and care. I worked for the government for a long time. Not the military exactly, but the principles were the same. Recognition flickered across Marcus's face. Wait, were you an operator? Special forces? Elizabeth gave a slight smile but offered no confirmation. I did compete internationally for a while, she said with a casual shrug. Set a few records. They stood until the gear caught up. Connor's face turned pale. His eyes widened. Wait, Elizabeth Thompson? As in the 1978 World Championships? She inclined her head slightly. My maiden name was Harrison. But yes, that was me. The Silver Eagles, now clustered around her, had dropped their smug attitudes entirely. Even the range safety officer had wandered over, drawn by the quiet stir. She was legendary, Connor explained to his confused teammates. She won national and international gold medals, then vanished. There were rumors she was recruited for specialized operations. Elizabeth quietly zipped her rifle case, unfazed. The past is the past, she said. Today, I'm just an old woman enjoying an afternoon at the range. Word spread like wildfire. Within 20 minutes, the parking lot buzzed with whispers. The legend of Elizabeth Thompson had returned, and she was at their range. Staff on break rushed back in, pretending to tidy up or needing to pass through. Anything for a glimpse. Even the facility's owner, a gruff, retired officer who rarely emerged, stepped out silently to watch from a distance. The Silver Eagles had completely transformed. Gone were the smirks and sarcasm. In their place, humility, awe, and genuine curiosity. Would you mind showing us your technique? Marcus asked softly. His voice now held none of the earlier arrogance, just admiration. I've shot competitively for 15 years, he added, but I've never seen anyone handle wind drift like you do. That consistency at range, it's unreal. Elizabeth carefully set her rifle aside and approached. Adjust your elbow, she said gently, guiding his arm. Your body matters more than your target at this range. Breathing, posture, even your heartbeat influences the shot. Marcus followed every word. Better, Elizabeth nodded. Now, feel the wind. Not just with your eyes. Feel it on your cheek, in your ears. She adjusted his stance again, movement subtle but exact. It's not about controlling the environment, she said. It's about understanding it. The wind speaks if you learn how to listen. Ryan, the most vocal skeptic earlier, stepped forward with a sheepish expression. Mrs. Thompson, would you mind looking at my grip? I've been struggling with consistency past 800 yards. Elizabeth nodded and took her time. For several minutes she worked with each of them, offering subtle corrections, small insights. Not once did she raise her voice. Not once did she gloat. They listened intently now. The woman they'd mocked had become their quiet mentor. Nearby, Dustin sat glued to his phone. His eyes widened. Guys, he whispered, I just Googled her. He looked up, stunned. She is Elizabeth Thompson, the one from the '78 World Championships. That record-breaking shot. People said it was impossible. Elizabeth simply shrugged. Records are meant to be broken, she said lightly. There's a young woman from South Korea who beat mine 5 years ago. She's the one you should be studying. Remarkable talent. From the far side of the range, the female shooter Elizabeth had noticed earlier approached and extended her hand. I'm Alexis, one of the instructors here. She shook her head in admiration. What you did today, it was long overdue. These boys needed the reminder. Connor stood a few steps away, his confidence visibly shaken. He watched the others gather around Elizabeth, a mix of embarrassment and awe flickering across his face. Finally, during a lull in the conversation, he approached her. Mrs. Thompson, Elizabeth, he said quietly, I owe you an apology. His voice cracked slightly. I was arrogant, condescending. I treated you like a joke. He dropped his gaze. I was wrong. Elizabeth studied him, not unkindly. You're a talented instructor, Connor, she said evenly. Your technical skills are sharp, but you teach from ego, not from heart. You're so busy proving yourself, you forget to connect with your students. The words hit him harder than any critique of his shooting ever had. He blinked, nodded slowly. I've never met anyone who shoots like you. I could learn a lot, we all could, if you're willing to teach. A genuine smile, the first of the day, softened Elizabeth's features. That's actually why I came, she said. My nephew didn't give me this session. I asked for it. She glanced at the group still practicing with new focus. I've been watching your team at competitions. You're all talented, but you've plateaued. Too much focus on gear and showmanship, not enough on fundamentals. Connor turned, following her gaze. The Silver Eagles were now hunched together, comparing notes, focused and humble. Marcus caught Elizabeth's last comment and nodded thoughtfully. We've been stuck in the same rankings for 2 seasons. Maybe this is the reason why. Connor watched his students with a new clarity, the weight of Elizabeth's words sinking in. He turned back to her, a sense of possibility dawning in his eyes. Would you consider coming back? Maybe for a full workshop? The team would benefit greatly from your experience. Elizabeth shouldered her bag, checking the time. Next Tuesday works for me, 9 a.m. sharp. She paused, then added with a slight smirk, and Connor, bring the ladies from Thursday night. All of them. She looked pointedly at him. Talent comes in all forms. You just need the wisdom to recognize it. The range owner, a quiet figure who had been observing from the sidelines, finally approached. He extended his hand, a respectful gleam in his eye. Mrs. Thompson, he said, his tone measured, it would be an honor to have you as a guest instructor. We'd be happy to compensate you, of course. Elizabeth shook his hand firmly. No need, she replied with a small, almost nostalgic smile. Sometimes the best payment is seeing people grow. She glanced back at the Silver Eagles, now engaged in deeper discussions, exchanging tips and corrections. I have a feeling these young men will keep me entertained. A faint voice drifted across the range. Can you believe we were making grandma jokes? Ryan's voice rang out, full of disbelief. She could outshoot us blindfolded. Elizabeth smiled to herself, sensing the shift in their demeanor. The Silver Eagles had gone from arrogant mockery to eager respect, and she'd done it with nothing more than her experience and humility. As she headed toward her car, she heard Connor's voice growing animated as he planned next week's training session. The young man had potential, and now he had the perspective to truly lead. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows over the ridgeline shooting complex. Elizabeth walked to her car, the sound of her footsteps quiet in the still evening air. Behind her, the Silver Eagles were already engaged in heated discussions, their earlier arrogance replaced with a sense of humility and eagerness. The lessons she had shared were sinking in. As she passed the group, she heard Ryan's voice again, this time laced with a mixture of awe and regret. Man, I can't believe we were mocking her. She could probably outshoot us with her eyes closed. Elizabeth's smile was small, but it carried the weight of years of experience. There was power in being underestimated, a quiet strength that had served her well over the years. At the parking lot, she slid into the driver's seat of her old car. The engine hummed to life with a reassuring rumble. She looked back at the range once more, her thoughts drifting to the team she'd just helped. Connor, too, was a different person now, his earlier swagger gone. His raw talent had always been there, but now, with the right guidance, he might finally be able to channel it into something greater. As she drove away, Elizabeth's mind lingered on her earlier conversation with him. He'd apologized, genuinely, without the defensive posturing she'd seen in so many young men. That alone spoke volumes. But what had struck her most was his willingness to learn, to let go of ego and embrace the true lessons of marksmanship. It was rare to see that kind of self-awareness, and she felt a sense of pride, knowing she'd played a part in his growth. As Elizabeth drove down the winding road that led away from the ridgeline shooting complex, the landscape bathed in the soft glow of sunset. She couldn't help but feel a sense of contentment settle over her. Today had been more than just a chance to showcase her skills. It had been an opportunity to pass on the lessons she had learned over decades of both success and failure. Her thoughts drifted back to the early days, when she was the young prodigy in the world of competitive shooting, breaking records and gaining recognition. It felt like a lifetime ago. The world had changed since then, and so had she. There was something more satisfying now in sharing her knowledge, seeing others grow, and witnessing that spark of realization in their eyes when they finally grasped the true essence of shooting, of focus, discipline, and patience. Elizabeth had long ago come to terms with the fact that her competitive days were behind her. The records she'd set were no longer relevant in the world of high-tech precision shooting, but that wasn't what drove her anymore. What mattered now was the impact she could have on the next generation, like Connor, who now saw the value in humility and the true meaning of teaching. As she neared her home, Elizabeth's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, recognizing the number. It was Marcus. She'd suspected he might call after today's lesson. "Hello, Marcus," she answered, her voice warm but calm. "Elizabeth," he began, his tone filled with a newfound respect. "I just wanted to thank you again. The team's already talking about next week's session, and we're all really looking forward to learning more from you." "I'm glad to hear that," she replied. "It's important to remember that the best shooters are the ones who never stop learning." There was a brief pause before Marcus spoke again. "Would you consider coming back for a full workshop? The team could really benefit from your experience." Elizabeth smiled softly as she pulled into her driveway, the night air cooling the heat of the day. "Let's talk more next week. I think your team has the potential to get to the next level, but they need to learn to work as a team, not just as individuals." "Absolutely," Marcus agreed. "Thank you again, Elizabeth. We'll see you on Tuesday." After ending the call, Elizabeth stepped out of the car and stretched, her muscles stiff from hours at the range. She'd done more than just teach marksmanship today. She'd reminded them all of a crucial lesson. Talent alone wasn't enough. It was about focus, humility, and a deep understanding of the environment you were working in. With a contented sigh, she headed inside, ready for a quiet evening. As she opened the door, she caught sight of a photo on the mantel, a younger version of herself, standing proudly with a trophy in hand. Those days felt so far behind her now, but the pride she'd felt in those moments still lingered. The next morning, Elizabeth awoke early, the quiet of the house enveloping her as she went through her usual morning routine. As she sipped her coffee, she reflected on the events of the previous day. There was a subtle satisfaction in knowing that her experience had made a difference. She had always believed that her purpose in life wasn't to be the best, but to help others become their best. And in a way, yesterday had proven that she was still fulfilling that purpose. By 8:30 a.m., she was back in her car, this time headed toward Ridgeline Shooting Complex for the training session. The road felt different today. There was a sense of anticipation in the air, not just for her, but for the entire Silver Eagles team. The conversations from yesterday had stuck with them, and she could feel the energy shift as she approached the range. When she arrived, she was greeted by Marcus, who was standing near the entrance, a look of enthusiasm on his face. "Morning, Elizabeth," he said, his voice brighter than it had been the day before. "The guys are pumped for today. They've been talking about everything you showed them yesterday." "That's good to hear," Elizabeth replied, stepping out of the car and stretching her legs. She could already hear the sound of gunfire echoing across the range, a steady rhythm that made the place feel alive. It was as if the air itself buzzed with the promise of progress. As she walked toward the shooting stations, she noticed the Silver Eagles gathered in their usual spot, but today they looked different. They were focused, their posture straighter, their eyes sharper. There was no sign of the arrogance or cockiness from yesterday, only a quiet determination. Connor was the first to approach her. He had the same respect in his eyes that he'd shown the day before, but now it was paired with an eagerness to learn. "Morning, Elizabeth," he greeted, giving her a nod. "The guys are ready to put what you taught them into practice." "I'm glad to hear it," Elizabeth said, giving him a brief smile. "Let's get started. Today's about refining those skills and learning to adjust in real time. Shooting is as much about reaction as it is preparation." The team moved to their designated stations, and Elizabeth began guiding each member through their techniques. She didn't focus on the basics this time. Instead, she challenged them. Small, subtle adjustments in their breathing, posture, and focus. She watched closely as they tried to implement her teachings. Some struggled, while others quickly adapted. She moved from one shooter to the next, providing guidance where needed and allowing them to work through their own mistakes. As the session progressed, Elizabeth's confidence in the team grew. Despite their rough start, they were showing remarkable progress. They weren't just following instructions. They were thinking critically, making their own adjustments, and beginning to trust the fundamentals rather than relying solely on equipment or ego. After a break, Elizabeth called them together for a quick debrief. "You've all made good progress today," she began, her voice firm but encouraging. "But remember, marksmanship isn't just about hitting a target, it's about control. Control over your body, control over your mind, and control over the environment. The target is secondary." Marcus raised his hand. "So it's about discipline, right?" "Exactly," Elizabeth replied, nodding. "The discipline to not just take the shot, but to make sure every variable is accounted for. The wind, the terrain, your breath, it all matters." Ryan, who had been one of the most skeptical members the day before, now seemed to be fully invested. "Mrs. Thompson, I've never thought about it like that. The way you approach it, it's not just about the rifle, it's about the shooter." Elizabeth smiled. "That's right. The rifle is only as good as the shooter behind it, and the shooter is only as good as their understanding of the process." She watched as the team digested her words. It wasn't about perfection, it was about consistent, focused effort, and that was something that could be applied to much more than just shooting. As the session drew to a close, Elizabeth felt a sense of accomplishment. She hadn't just taught them a new set of skills, she had instilled a mindset, and that in her eyes was far more valuable than any record or trophy. The team gathered their gear, chatting excitedly about what they had learned. They were already talking about their next training session, eager to continue their progress. Elizabeth lingered for a moment, watching them. She felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing that she had helped them take the first step towards something greater. Marcus approached her one last time before she left. "Elizabeth, I can't thank you enough. I think you've given us something we can build on for a long time. You've helped us see beyond the competition." Elizabeth chuckled softly. "The competition isn't the end goal, Marcus. It's just a marker along the way. Focus on growth, not just victory." "Absolutely," Marcus said, nodding in agreement. "We'll see you next week?" "You can count on it," she replied with a smile, then headed to her car. As she drove home, Elizabeth felt a sense of peace. It wasn't the rush of competition or the thrill of breaking records that satisfied her anymore. It was something deeper, something that could only be gained through experience. The joy of teaching, of sharing knowledge, and of watching others grow. It was, after all, the best kind of legacy. The following week, Elizabeth returned to Ridgeline's shooting complex as promised. The Silver Eagles were there, awaiting her with a newfound eagerness. The lessons from the previous session were still fresh in their minds, and the progress they had made in such a short time was evident. Marcus greeted her first, his expression a mix of respect and excitement. "We've been practicing every day since you left. I can't tell you how much of a difference it's made," he said, his tone filled with genuine appreciation. Elizabeth smiled, her eyes scanning the group. "I'm glad to hear it, but remember, it's about consistency. Keep working on the fundamentals, and everything else will follow." The team was different today. The previous cockiness had been replaced with a quiet, focused determination. They weren't just going through the motions. They were thinking, adjusting, and improving with each shot. Elizabeth could see it in their stance, in the way they communicated with each other, in the small but significant improvements in their technique. She worked with them for the next few hours, guiding them through drills and fine-tuning their skills. As she observed their growth, she felt a sense of fulfillment she hadn't known in years. It wasn't about her, it was about the transformation she had helped them achieve. They were no longer just a group of competitive shooters. They were becoming true marksmen. During a break, Elizabeth sat back and watched the Silver Eagles practice. They had gone from being arrogant to humble, from dismissive to respectful. They had learned that true skill didn't come from arrogance or fancy equipment. It came from a deep understanding of the craft, from humility, and from the willingness to learn. As the session came to a close, Connor approached her. "I've been thinking about what you said last week," he said, his voice thoughtful. "You were right. It's not about the gear, and it's not about the record books. It's about being present, understanding the fundamentals, and respecting the process." Elizabeth nodded. "Exactly. And when you do that, everything else falls into place." Connor smiled, a hint of gratitude in his eyes. "You've taught us more than just shooting. You've taught us how to be better people, better teammates." The team gathered around her as the session wrapped up. They weren't just saying goodbye, they were thanking her for the lessons, for the humility, and for the wisdom she had shared. Elizabeth could feel the change in the air. They had learned to respect the process, each other, and themselves. As the sun began to set over the shooting range, Elizabeth packed up her gear and headed toward her car. The Silver Eagles were already discussing their next steps, excited to continue their training with the newfound perspective Elizabeth had given them. She had given them more than just lessons in marksmanship. She had given them a new approach to life, to learning, and to success. Elizabeth smiled as she drove away, knowing that the real measure of success wasn't in records or trophies. It was in the impact you had on others. And today she had made a difference. She glanced in the rearview mirror, watching the range fade into the distance. There would always be more to learn, more to teach, and more to give. But for now, she had done what she came to do. She had shown them all that the greatest strength comes not from ego or age, but from humility, understanding, and a willingness to grow. The world was full of assumptions and judgments, but Elizabeth knew that the truth often lay in the quietest of places, the places where the most surprising strengths were hiding, waiting to be recognized. And sometimes the most powerful weapon was the one that no one ever saw coming. As the road stretched ahead of her, Elizabeth felt content. She had once been underestimated too, but today she had taught others the power of recognizing hidden potential, something that would stay with them for the rest of their lives. As the story came to a close, Elizabeth drove off into the evening, leaving behind a group of shooters who had learned a valuable lesson about humility and true skill. Her unassuming presence had shattered their assumptions, showing them that talent, wisdom, and experience often go unnoticed when we judge by appearances alone. The Silver Eagles now had a new sense of purpose, no longer focused on their egos or their equipment, but on the fundamentals that truly make a shooter great. Elizabeth's impact wasn't just in her ability to hit a target from impossible distances. It was in the quiet way she reminded them that the greatest strength comes from understanding, not boasting. As the sun dipped below the horizon, her words echoed in their minds. Talent without humility limits itself. And in that moment, they knew that the lessons they had learned from her would stay with them, not just at the range, but in life. Thank you for joining us in this story. Remember, the quietest person in the room might just have the loudest lessons to share. Don't judge a book by its cover, and always be open to learning from those who might surprise you. Until next time.